This is part 2 of the Nutritional Ergogenic Aids chapter. We covered quite a few of them in the first part of the video, and here we are I think there's 4 left to talk about, which shouldn't take us too long. Let's just jump right in. Dr. Jenkins here. I would like you to know about whey protein. I would say whey protein and creatine are the 2 supplements that people are most familiar with. You'll see this whey protein pretty much everywhere. You can read about what it is. It's a byproduct of cheese formed from the milk part, and that's where they get the name whey. We can get it naturally, okay? So the idea here is, if I bring in more, is it going to be better? Let's talk about its proposed mechanism of action. Its proposed mechanism of action, it being a type of protein, is that it could help support more muscle growth. And when it says weight gain, we're talking about lean mass, which is muscle mass, and also help recovery. What does the research show? Listen, a ton of people take whey protein because of its proposed ergogenic effect. This is something that is much more popular among weightlifters and strength athletes. This would not necessarily be something for an endurance athlete. An endurance athlete doesn't want to have extra muscle mass, right? So this is going to be for our strength athletes like weightlifters. You might find this surprising. We haven't yet been able to find consistent evidence across scientific studies that people who take whey protein versus those who don't, when they're on a similar diet and a similar exercise plan, those that take whey protein do not have more muscle growth, more muscle mass, or are able to lift stronger weights. However, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence, and I mentioned this in our last lecture on pharmacological and chemical ergogenic aids. You know, if you ask people, a lot of them will say, oh yeah, when I took whey protein, I gained more muscle mass. So it's possible that for some people it works, but I'm here to tell you that when we do the scientific studies, there's no significant difference. Now, of course, whey protein, it's pretty safe from what we know so far. But you could probably save a lot of money and just get the protein that you need through your diet and be just as well off. Remember also the risks of bringing in too much protein. And I talked about this in the protein chapter at length, right? You're probably tired of me talking about it. Even though you can't see my face, you're probably still tired of it. If you get a lot of protein in your diet, plus you're taking a whey protein supplement, you think you're doing the right thing, but you have to do your own diet analysis. You might be taking in more protein than you need. Remembering that we can't store large amounts of protein, remembering that protein is hard to break down, if forced to, the body has no choice but to turn it into fat. Okay? And this is something that's legal. All right. I would also like you to know some things about the medium chain triglycerides. I mentioned this way back in our fat chapter. What is it? Well, as the name suggests, it is a type of triglyceride. We talked about short chain, medium chain, and long chain fatty acids. Well, this is a medium chain fatty acid. It's a medium chain fatty acid. You may remember that the long chain fatty acids are the most common in food, but we did talk about the medium chain triglycerides being the best in terms of ability to metabolize for energy. So in that way, the manufacturers of this have the right idea. If I was going to take in a fatty acid that was going to be best able to be metabolized for energy, it sure would be the medium chain. Of course, we get this naturally through food. So the idea is, if I bring in more am I going to be able to burn more fat? So of course, that's the proposed mechanism of action. If I have more of these fatty acids available, will I be able to burn more fat? And if I can burn more fat, I can get a lot more energy. This would be something that would be beneficial mostly to our aerobic athletes, because they're the ones that are going to be relying more on fat. Similar to the coenzyme Q10, this is something that is also marketed for weight loss, because its proposed benefit is to help you burn more fat. It is used medically for some things, but I'm not going to ask you about that, but review these. More fat oxidation, and it could delay fatigue. What's interesting is that it is used a lot of times by strength athletes, and that may not be the people that it would be best for. Certainly if you're doing a long weight training session, of course you're going to be burning some fat, but this would certainly not be, even though it's used by strength athletes. It potentially could make you more lean, which I guess is a benefit to strength athletes. But in terms of the actual ability to metabolize more fat, I would say it would benefit more of the aerobic or endurance athletes. What does the research say? Inconclusive. So there's really not a consistent amount of scientific data to say more is better. And I'm going to say what I said before about coenzyme Q10. Why? Well, we don't know for sure. Maybe it's because it's other steps of fat metabolism. So just because you speed up one of the avenues of fat metabolism doesn't mean that the others are automatically sped up too. All right. Okay, glutamine is one that you don't have to know. I'm going to talk about it, but it won't be on the test. Glutamine is an example of a non-essential amino acid. It's actually quite abundant in our body. It's one that our body makes. It's utilized in a lot of other ways physiologically that I'm not going to get into, but it's a really common amino acid in our body. How might the glutamine work? Well, because it's an amino acid that's very prevalent in our body, it could help us make other amino acids. And additionally, something that is interesting, this is something that is available for a process that I mentioned before, but just so we can sound smart, this is something that's available for gluconeogenesis, or the production of glucose from a non-glucose source. Again, not on the test, but so how could this help an athlete? Well, if I have more amino acids, I could produce more muscle tissue to repair and rebuild muscles. If I can convert it to glucose, I could potentially get more energy. What does the research say? Some studies show that can actually have the opposite effect, which is interesting. This is not going to be on the test. More research is needed. All right, and the last one that you also don't have to know about is called ribose. Ribose is a 5-carbon sugar, and it helps to form DNA and RNA. So if you've had any education on DNA and RNA, you've absolutely heard about ribose. When we look, this is DNA. It's got that spiral shape, right? Ribose is used to form this, deoxyribose. So it's a really important part of that DNA, and it turns out RNA, which is a single strand. Because of that, it can combine with something else called adenine to form adenosine, which is another part of that process of cellular respiration. And if we have, the thinking is, if we have anything that is involved in that process of cellular respiration, converting glucose to ATP, well, then I can produce more ATP, right? What does the research say? Few studies are available, so we really don't know yet. Interesting. Okay. So, study tips. We've covered a lot of ergogenic aids, and I know that I've cut the whole list in half in terms of which ones I put as check mark. So those are the ones you need to know. The ones that I put an X, you don't need to know. You've got to do some kind of study technique that works for you. Maybe you just want to make a list, ergogenic aids on one column and their proposed benefit on the other. Maybe you want to group it by the ones that are geared for more of the strength athlete versus the ones that are geared for the more aerobic athletes. I encourage you to group them in some way that would work for you, okay? And I'm going to bring us back to this. I discussed this way back at the beginning of the course because this is indeed one of the reasons why we're here. Right? Sports nutrition is just the wild, wild west. People want to make money. Athletes want to get better. So people are marketing whatever they can to make money. Yet, 2/3 of the ones that we've talked about, 2/3 of the common 20 supplements that we've talked about are either have inconclusive data or have data that do not support its effectiveness. Yet, it's still a big, big market. And remember, these supplements are not regulated. We don't know largely the long-term effects, so that should certainly give you some caution. One last thing is, I think we still have a lot to learn. So sports nutrition is a young field in terms of science. So for example, whey protein. Whey protein is one that seems to have very few side effects that are negative. Whey protein seems to have some effect that's positive anecdotally when you ask people. So we might find out more about it. We once held all these crazy beliefs and we learned more. So we might learn more, and that could go in the positive benefit of ergogenic aids being used, or it could also put them in even a more negative light. So stay tuned. If you're interested in this topic, I think in the next 10, 20 years, we're going to learn a lot more. Lastly, remember, it's not FDA regulated, these supplements, and the people that are behind this, even though many of them have your interest at heart, what is their number one goal? Money. Okay? All right, folks, good job. Keep carrying on and working hard.